Hello, welcome to Lil's Vintage World and welcome to a video all about the classic books that I read in the month of September 2020. I'm going to be doing these types of wrap-ups instead of my monthly wrap-ups just because I love classics that much that I want to spend a little bit more time talking about them. Now I have 5 classic books to share with you today, so let's get straight into it. So the first classic I want to talk to you about is Crewe by Rose Macaulay, first published in 1928. This book tells the story of a young woman called Denham. Denham's mother has died and her and her father go to live abroad. I think it's like near Spain. And years pass by and then her father dies and Denham goes to live with her aunt and her cousins. And Denham has to live this very different life that she's used to. She has to live by the London standards of the 1920s and not the life that she's used to. And she doesn't really see the point of a lot of social structures and social conventions. She just doesn't get it. So she doesn't understand like about parties, and she doesn't really get about the institution of marriage. She doesn't kind of get it, and she's quite a selfish character, but it's not done necessarily maliciously. She just has had a very different upbringing, and here she is, this 20-something-year-old trying to navigate her life into what is expected of her, you know, marriage and children, etc., whereas she doesn't necessarily really want that. I really enjoyed this book. This was my first Rose Macaulay, but oh boy, it will not be my last. I thought this was fabulous. I want to come back to the writing style in a bit, but I thought Rose Macaulay wrote this book so well. I know this isn't even her most famous work, and I thought it was so good. I liked the fact that we have these host of likeable and unlikable characters, mostly unlikable. I mean, the character of Denham herself, I really disliked, yet I wanted to find out what was happening with her. I just found that so interesting. I don't know why. I really disliked her, but I just found it rather interesting to find out what was happening next in her story, because she's someone who's very much concerned with herself and her own means, and she doesn't kind of get why other people aren't the same. I quite like that. But as I said, there's a whole host of characters in here that you'll find likeable and unlikable. I also really like the fact that this book is about not fitting in and being an outsider, which I'm sure a lot of us can relate to at some time of our life. Felt like we haven't fitted in and we feel a bit like an outsider too, and I like that. This book is a satirical novel. It's about the bohemian life of 1920s and what is kind of expected of a woman of this time, and how Denham definitely doesn't do any of that, but it's quite funny the way she goes about it. I, as I said, adored the writing of this. Her writing is really unique because it's so beautiful at times and beautifully written, but there's so much satire just sprinkled in, and it's done with such ease to it as well. There are times that I was laughing out loud while I was reading this, and I really like it. It kind of reminded me a bit like Evelyn Waugh's writing style in that terms of satireness of the boho kind of lifestyle, but with the kind of beautiful writing style of Elizabeth Taylor to boot. It was kind of that sort of style, and I really enjoyed it. When I finished this book, I put it down and I thought, oh, I really want to reread it. And then I realised actually the reason why I wanted to read it is not necessarily for the story again, because I mean the story was good, but it wasn't amazing. But the reason why I wanted to read it again was because I wanted to delve into Rose Macaulay's beautiful writing again. It's something very, very special. However, I've put off reading anything since, just for a little while, just to give myself a little break from it so I can really appreciate it again when I come back to it in a little bit, because this book was something very special. The next book that I want to share with you is The Town in Bloom by Dodie Smith, first published in 1965. So this book is set in 3 parts. We have part 1 and part 3, which is set in like their modern times, the 1960s, and then part 2 is set 40 years previously in the 1920s. And it's about these 4 women, we have Mouse, who's our main character. We never learn her real name. We have Molly, Lillian and Zell, and again we never learn Zell's real name either. And at the beginning of this book, the four women are planning on meeting up, and they meet up every 5 years to catch up and talk about their lives. And 3 do meet up, Mouse, Molly and Lillian, but Zell doesn't. And then they look out the window of the restaurant and they see someone who looks a bit down and out on their luck, and they think it could be Zell. And so Mouse leaves and she follows Zell, and she sees where she goes into, but she doesn't go in. And then suddenly we're transported back in time 40 years previously to learn about these girls' lives when they were, you know, in their late teens, early 20s, and how they met, etc. So Mouse is our main character, and she met Molly and Lillian at a club, which is a club for kind of like, it's where you live. So it's essentially digs where you live if you're into like theatre and dance and singing and that type of thing. If you're in that bubble and you live in this club to kind of work together, getting auditions and bits and bobs like that. So we spend a lot of time at the theatre. Mouse ends up getting a job there and she wants to be an actress. We also spend a lot of time at the digs, and then we learn how these 3 then meet Zell. And then part 3, as I said, we go back in time to the present in the 60s. I liked this book. I thought this was good. I thought it was quite interesting with the characters and character development, because I really liked the character of Mouse when I first met her in the 1960s. I thought she was fab. But then when we go back in time, I didn't like her at all. Same with Lillian. I like Lillian when we're in the present, but when we go back, I don't like her. Molly's a character that I felt like I never really got to know properly. I felt like she's always the one being pushed in the background. And Zell, I adored all throughout, even though she's not in it as much as the rest of them. I thought she was probably the most interesting character of them all. I liked this. The problem that I have with this is that I'm not really... I like going to the theatre, I like watching theatre, but I can't sing to save my life, I can't dance, I can't act. And I think if I was interested more in those things, I would really enjoy this book a lot more, because this book is a book about friendships and relationships and how those things can be great, but how also they can fall apart as well, because that's what happens in the book. But there's so much like extra theatre-ness going on that sometimes the theatre feels like another character in itself, and unless I'm watching the theatre, I'm not that bothered, to be honest. I know that sounds horrible and harsh, but that's just how I felt. I like the writing style of Dodie Smith. Dodie Smith is one of those authors who I never feel too inclined to pick up. Like, I'm never craving her work. But when I pick her work up, I find her writing so easy to read and get swept up in. So overall, I enjoyed this book. I don't think it's as good as The New Moon with the Old, but I did enjoy it, and I would recommend that you pick it up if it sounds like your sort of thing. Back to the 1920s for the next one. This is The Ladies of Linden by Margaret, first published in 1923, which I think makes this her first novel, but I will have to double check. Anyway, this book starts with 18-year-old called Agatha, and Agatha is due to marry John. Now, John owns Lyndon, this very nice, big, beautiful, very vast house, and she marries him and she becomes Lady of Linden. Shocker. And all goes well, and then an old flame of hers kind of comes back into the fold. Now, this is her cousin Gerald. Now, when her mother initially found out about the affair before she married John, her mother quickly put an end to it, and that was it, done, dusted. But now despite the fact that she's married, now he's come back into the fold, it kind of, feelings are starting to just simmer underneath, let's say. As well as this kind of love triangle thing, we have the whole host of John's family that are there. and we have mothers, mothers-in-laws, we have siblings as they're getting married off, and all the family arguments to boot. This was my first Margaret Cardy, and I have to say I really enjoyed it. I liked how this book is set out. So it's in 5 chapters, and each chapter we kind of jump ahead a bit in time. Sometimes we jump by a few years, sometimes we just jump by a few weeks, but the characters get older and the characters develop in time, and I quite liked that. Something I did find quite interesting was once I finished this book, despite the fact that I really enjoyed it and the writing style was something very special, I went on to Goodreads and I saw there was such a mixed bag for this book in terms of how people rated it and reviews. And some people really liked it, like myself, and some people didn't. Now, I think the negative for me is the characters, essentially. I think the writing is beautiful, and I really love Margaret Cardy's writing, and it's definitely the thing that's going to push me to read more of her work. But the characters of this, some of the choices that the characters make, I didn't kind of agree with. And the characters at the beginning, I thought, I don't know if they would come out to be this type of character that they are by the end. And it kind of felt a little bit lost in that retrospect. But as I said, I did really enjoy this. Now, Margaret Cardy is known for The Constant Nymph. That's her most famous work, which I haven't read as of yet, but I'm really excited to read it because, as I said, I really enjoyed the writing style of this and thought it was something quite special. Jumping forward by a decade now to 1933, we have Business as Usual by Jane Oliver and Anne Stafford. Anne Stafford is the illustrator and Jane Oliver is the author. That's right, this book is illustrated. Don't you love books with illustrations inside? Yes, you do. So this book is set in the 1930s and it's about a woman called Hilary. Now Hilary lives in Scotland, but she moves from Scotland to London to get a job, and her plan is to get a job for 1 year and then come home and get married. Plain, simple, works like a treat. She gets a job at a department store, which sounds suspiciously like it could be Selfridges, and she gets a job in the book department, funnily enough, and we navigate our way through her life as she goes up the ranks of different jobs in this department, how she gets on with people, how she's corresponding with her fiance and with her mother. And this book is told in letter format, so the letters are from Hilary to, say, her fiance Basil, or Hilary to her parents. We also have letters from the store, which is called Everyman's Store, and they're from various different people that we can read about them too. And I thought this book was just so fun. I really liked the character of Hilary. I liked how she developed through the book. The ending I really liked as well, and I was quite satisfied with it. And despite the fact that it is written in letter form, I felt like I got to know Hilary really, really well actually, and really connected with her. And it's just a lovely read. It's one of those easy reads that, you know, you could spend a whole day reading and it would just be perfect. It's charming, it's warm, it's witty, it's just a lovely light read. I loved learning about her and what she's going to do. She works out what she's going to do with her money in her pay packet to go to a flat she's found, and then when she earns a bit more money she can move to a new place and all these types of things. I loved her kind of navigating herself and how much she can like spend on lunch. I've really liked all the little mundane things as well. I thought it was just charming. So yes, recommend it if you haven't read it, because I'm sure all book lovers would like a book about books. And finally, the last classic that I read in the month of September was The Chamomile Lawn by Mary Wesley. This is my first Mary Wesley, and it's first published in 1984. So this book starts just before the start of the Second World War, where we have a married couple called Hannah and Richard who went through the last World War, the First World War. Hannah lost her husband, Richard lost his leg and he was gassed in the war, and they have married, not necessarily for love, but it works, and they live in Helena's house, which is beautiful and it overlooks like a cliff and beaches. and each summer they have the nieces and nephews over for the whole of the summer. And so they have the host of nieces and nephews, apart from Sophie. Now Sophie is the youngest, she's 10, and she kind of lives with them on a permanent basis, but all the rest kind of come and they hang out and they have picnics and things, and they spend time on the Chamomile Lawn. Very nice. And it starts with this kind of summer just before World War II starts, and then we progress over time to when the Second World War does start and what life becomes for these young people. So whether the girls get married and do some voluntary work, some of the boys get called up, Sophie heads off to school, and it's about how they then manage their life through this war and remembering the happy times of the summer on the Chamomile Lawn and how it kind of used to be as a family. Now this book is a real easy read. I've heard so many people sing this book's praises, and it's one of those books that I think you could take on holiday with you. You could sit on a sun lounger by a pool and you could read it in like a day or two and get really lost in it. But for me, I didn't like it that much, sad to say. I mean, I thought it was okay, but I was a bit disappointed. I feel like this book is definitely one of those easy holiday reads, and I don't know, maybe I thought too much into it, but for me there is a bit too much sexual stuff in this that were kind of felt a little bit unnecessary, particularly around Sophie. Like there's a bit at the beginning when Sophie, as I said, she's 10 and she doesn't have any knickers on, and they keep talking about the fact that she's got no knickers on. It's like, do you need to keep talking about that? And then as she gets older, there's some sexual stuff and it makes me feel uncomfortable when I was reading it. And it just, I think it's one of these books that if you read it in one sitting, I think you'll really enjoy it, but I'm quite a slow reader, so I can't do that. And yeah, it just, I don't know. I thought it was okay. It wasn't the best for me. And I think this is Mary Wesley's most famous work, so I don't think I'll be picking up any more of her works, but I know quite a few people, if you're after an easy holiday read, then I think this might be a good one to turn to. So there we have it. Those are the 5 classic books that I read in the month of September. Have you read any of these? If so, what did you make of them? Are any of them now going to sit on your wish list? I hope you enjoyed this video. Chat to me in the comments, all things bookish, and I shall see you soon for the next one. Bye for now.